Well, now, many of us will remember when the conference center was completed, President Hinckley got up and talked about the pulpit and talked about you and your influence. We're going to listen to just a little clip from President Hinckley.
And now, my brothers and sisters, I would like to tell you about another feature of this wonderful building. If I get a little personal and even a little sentimental, I hope you'll forgive me. I love trees. When I was a boy, we lived on a farm in the summer, a fruit farm. Every year at this season, we planted trees. I think I've never missed a spring since I was married, except for two or 3 years when we were absent from the city, that I have not planted trees. At least 1 or 2 fruit trees, shade trees, ornamental trees, and spruce, fern, pine among the conifers. I love trees. Well, some 36 years ago, I planted a black walnut. It was in a crowded area where it grew straight and tall to get the sunlight. A year ago, for some reason, it died. But walnut is a precious furniture wood. I called Brother Ben Banks of the 70, who before giving his full time to the church was in the business of hardwood lumber. He brought his 2 sons, one a bishop and the other recently released as a bishop, and who now run the business, to look at the tree. From all they could tell, it was solid, good, and beautiful wood. One of them suggested that it would make a pulpit for this hall. The idea excited me. The tree was cut down and then cut into 2 heavy logs. Then followed the long process of drying, first naturally and then kiln drying. The logs were cut into boards at a sawmill in Salem, Utah. The boards were then taken to Fetzer's woodworking plant, where expert craftsmen designed and built this magnificent pulpit with that wood. The end product is beautiful. I wish all of you could examine it closely. It represents superb workmanship. And here I am, speaking to you from the tree I grew in my backyard, where my children played and also grew. It is an emotional thing for me. I have planted another black walnut or 2. I will be long gone before they mature. When that day comes and this beautiful pulpit has grown old, perhaps one of them will do to make a replacement. To Elder Banks and his sons, Ben and Bradley, and to the skilled workers who have designed and built this, I offer my profound thanks for making it possible to have a small touch of mine in this great hall, where the voices of prophets will go out to all the world in testimony of the Redeemer of mankind.
Talk about what it felt like for you. President Hinckley called you on the phone and said, come out and look at this black walnut tree. Tell me what went through your mind.
I was excited. I mean, he called me actually to his office and told me he had planted this tree in his yard 36 years ago and the tree had died. He said, would you bring your boys up to look at that tree, Ben, and see if it has any value? I said, I'd be happy to, President. This was on a Friday afternoon. I called our sons, and they called Saturday morning and said, we're free, Dad. I called President Hinckley to make sure he'd be up there. And the boys driving up there said, Dad, we have a suggestion. The conference center was under construction at the time. And they said, if the wood in that tree's any good, Dad, maybe he might want to consider making the pulpit out of that tree for the conference center that he planted in his own yard. We arrived up at his home there in East Mill Creek, and he had had a little home built on the back of the property where one of his daughters lives now with her family. And he took the boys to introduce him to his wife in that little home. She was there that weekend, and he had a little garden up there, and he had a little orchard up there he loved to work in. We went over to look at the tree, and I said, President, Ben and Brad have a suggestion for you to consider. And he said, what's that? And I said, well, first of all, you need to know when you cut a tree down, you have to keep water running on it to keep it wet so it doesn't drought and chick and crack and split. And this tree's been dead since last fall, so the lumber may not be any good. But if it is, the boys have suggested, Ben and Brad, that maybe you might like to make the pulpit out of this for the conference center. He said, oh, that's a good idea. I hadn't thought of that. And so we let it go at that. And I said, well, the boys will bring a professional tree cut here and cut it down because it was so close to the house. So the next Saturday, our son Brad called and he says, Dad, I was up here with a professional tree cutter. We got the tree cut down. We were just loading it on one of our trucks when President Hinckley drove up and said, Brad, I want you to know I am really, really, really excited about that suggestion that you and your brother Ben made to make the pulpit out of this tree for the I'd never thought of that, he said. That is a wonderful idea. And so it went from there, and that was exciting. One thing that the membership of the church are not aware of, during the course of that, the boys said, Dad, we have these little short pieces of walnut that cannot be used in the pulpit. It's too little, but we think we can make some mementos for his children. We're going up to meet with him. Come with us. We went and met with President Hinckley, and he was hesitant to say, I'd love to have you make something. And finally the boys said, President, leave it up to us. We'd like to make something for your children. I asked them if there was enough to make it for their grandchildren. They said, yeah. So what they did, they took this wood and they cut it out and they made like a little jewelry box out of it, one for each of the children and grandchildren. And on the top they lasered in a walnut tree, and you lift up the lid of each box, and lasered in is the wood for, it was the individual name of each child or grandchild. Says the wood for this box was made out of a tree that Gordon Bittner Hinckley planted in this yard in the year he planted that tree. Then they said, Dad, why don't we do something for his counselors and the 12 apostles? So they got some granite from the conference center, polished it beautifully. They got on a lathe, they built a little beehive of walnut out of his tree and put on top of granite from the conference center. And on the other end, they put in a pen holder, and then they had a walnut pen made on it and put in there for each of his counselors and the 12 apostles with their name on top. And they said, well, Dad, if we're doing it for his counselors and the 12 apostles, we ought to do something for him. I said, be my guest.
This must have been a pretty big tree.
and so then they got a big piece of granite, drilled 2 holes, put 2 silver poles in it, and they took and cut a cross section out of the tree about an inch, inch and a half thick, and left the bark on it and polished both sides to a beautiful walnut desk finish, and mounted that between these 2 silver poles on top of the granite, and put a plate on top with some scriptures about Gordon B. Hinckley's tree. And it sits down at the Hinckley alumni building in BYU now.
Oh, nice.
And we took all it. We called and told President Hinckley, his secretary, that they had all of this material ready for him. He called back and said he wants you to bring it to his office and bring your family. And we took all of that over there. As they took all this out, he wept and could not thank the boys enough. And it was just an experience that was wonderful. And if you went into the 12's office today, the ones that were serving there, you'd see that desk pen on their set. So it was a wonderful experience. The interesting thing after that was all done, and he spoke about it in conference, the boys, I started getting phone calls, and the boys got phone calls from other people saying, we've got a tree in our yard, can you come and look at it?
You became specialist.
Even had some as far as North Carolina call and said, we've got these trees, do you think your boys could take it off our hand? We've heard about how they do hardwood lumber work. It was far-reaching. It was a great story for our family.